Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak about the amendment that the Majority Leader just called up. The Trade Adjustment Assistance Program in particular is what I'll focus on in my remarks. And I want to, first of all, thank the Majority Leader for his leadership on this issue and helping us getting started today. I'm particularly grateful for the strong leadership that Chairman Baucus has provided, the chairman of our Finance Committee. I want to thank him and his staff for their tireless efforts, not just in leading up to today, but over a long period of time, being such a strong advocate for this program. For many months, Chairman Baucus has led the charge to ensure that a strong trade adjustment assistance program is reinstated because it's important public policy for our workers to get them retrained and to make sure they have the skills needed to compete in such a tough economy. So I appreciate his work, and I also appreciate Chairman Baucus's work for many years fighting for workers, especially when their jobs are at risk, their livelihood, and their families' economic security. Because I think Chairman Baucus and so many others, my colleague Senator Brown from Ohio has been a tremendous leader on this issue as well. And one thing we all understand, whether we're Democrats or Republicans or independents, we understand that we are in the midst still in the grip of a jobs crisis all across the country. And it knows no geographic boundaries, and it knows no party. People are worried and concerned that their jobs will continually be at risk. And some, of course, have already lost their jobs. Almost 14.5 million Americans at last count. So in the midst of that crisis, it's critically important that we take the steps here to make sure that those who want to get back into the workforce, those who want to improve their skills or be retrained in some way or another, have that opportunity. And we know that in the next couple of weeks, the Congress will be taking up free trade agreements. But before we do that, before we consider the debate and before we consider those agreements, we've got to make sure that our workers have the protections they need to deal with the ravages of foreign competition. Let me revise that, the ravages of unfair foreign competition. And there are lots of ways to talk about this program and this issue, and some of them, frankly, get a little academic. The best way for me to understand the importance of trade adjustment assistance is very much consistent with the recent and unfortunate economic history of my home state of Pennsylvania. In our Commonwealth, just by way of one example, but it's the best example I can cite because of the numbers of workers affected. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the 1970s and 80s, in a short period of time, in less than a decade, we had tens of thousands of steelworkers lose their jobs. Now, these were folks who worked in steel mills, not just for a couple of years, but for many instances, decades. They would graduate from high school, go into the steel mill, and be virtually guaranteed of a job for the rest of their life. A good job with good benefits that they could support their family on. But then we know what happened to those workers in that industry. A lot of their lives were destroyed in the 1970s and 80s because of the decline of the steel industry. And it is at times like that, when someone who's worked their whole life and put all of their energies into a job, and that job goes away in a matter of weeks or months or a few short years, we have to make sure that we're there for them at that moment. And one of the ways we can be there for them is with trade adjustment assistance. I could point to, and every member of the Senate could point to other examples as well, but I remember that horrific history in Pennsylvania where families were destroyed because of the loss of a job. So our trade policies have hit a lot of American workers very hard, and especially today we're seeing that. I mentioned Pennsylvania's manufacturing jobs as an example. According to an analysis by the Joint Economic Committee, of which I'm the chairman, from 1997 to 2010, just 13 years, manufacturing went from 16.4% of the gross domestic product of or gross state product, I should say, of Pennsylvania, down to 12.1%. 13 years, just a short period of time, that kind of decline in manufacturing jobs, from roughly 16.5 to 12. In total, the job loss in Pennsylvania manufacturing was nearly 300,000 good-paying jobs. While trade adjustment assistance can't bring those jobs back, we can take steps to help those workers in a tough time as they transition to new employment, to new skills, and to new opportunities. Many displaced workers need considerable training to re-enter the labor market. You just imagine if any one of us did the same job for years or decades and then had to turn on a dime to adjust to the difficulties in the economy. It takes a while. According to a report by the Joint Economic Committee as well, many of these folks who have lost their jobs are much older than the rest of the workforce, and they need to gain a number of skills. 57% of current participants in the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program are 45 years of age or older. 57%. Trade adjustment assistance can better address the needs of these displaced workers by requiring training and giving additional time for workers to gain the skills necessary to re-enter the workforce to prepare to compete in a tough economy, in a world economy. We know these programs work. We know that based upon the JEC report that I cited earlier, 53% of those who participated in trade adjustment assistance programs were reemployed within 3 months. 53% reemployed within 3 months after leaving the program itself. These participants also found lasting employment, with 80% of those workers employed within the first 3 months, remaining employed for an additional 6 months. We know that in 2009, several reforms were made to the program to reflect the realities of the modern workforce in the modern labor market. The amendment I offer today with my colleague Senator Brown of Ohio would reinstate these reforms, including the following, just by way of a quick summary. Number one, providing trade adjustment assistance benefits to service sector workers. Number two, covering workers who firms shift production to non-free trade agreement partner countries. For example, China and India. We hear a lot of people talking around here about how we got to compete with China and India and keep our workers at a high skill level to do that. This is one way to do that. Number three, and finally, increasing the health care tax credit subsidy to 72.5%, and hereby addressing one of the most significant costs for those without a job, the cost of health insurance. We all know, and I know firsthand, the benefits of a strong trade adjustment assistance program based upon what's happened in Pennsylvania over many years. According to the Department of Labor, from May of 2009 through June of 2011, just a little more than 2 years, nearly 10,000 additional workers qualified for assistance due to these essential reforms in Pennsylvania. So the reforms that we made then in 2009 that we put in place have helped nearly 10,000 workers in Pennsylvania. If you look at it nationwide, 185,783 additional workers were certified for TAA participation because of those reforms. In total, trade adjustment assistance has assisted nearly 500,000 people over this time period. So our action this week will ensure that thousands of American workers will be able to count on retraining and other support if they lose their job through no fault of their own. More and more jobs, and we all know this, but it bears repeating, more and more jobs have been sent overseas, leaving workers out in the cold. Nothing they did has caused outsourcing of their job, and yet they're left with the consequences, and their families suffer with those same consequences. To get jobs in new industries, workers need new skills. They need to be retrained and introduced to new skills. Trade adjustment assistance helps those workers hurt by foreign trade back to work, while also ensuring the employers have a skilled workforce at the same time. So finally, let me urge all my colleagues to support this amendment. Trade adjustment assistance has a long and proud history of bipartisan support in the Senate, and I hope we can continue that with this amendment and with this work. Those who have been affected by this know this story better than I or better than any of us. And it's about time that we stood with those workers when they and their families are suffering. And I would yield the floor.